Hey Parker, I see you got a girlfriend, huh?
Yeah, Twilight Sparkle.
I... well, yeah, I do. Boy.
Anyways, what do you want to do today?
Yeah.
Maybe we can go to another battlefield. Actually, two of them. Let's go to the not Fredericksburg, Fredericktown in, I think, Missouri or something like, yeah, Missouri. Fredericktown, Missouri. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Yep, so let's go. Welcome to the Fredericktown battlefield.
Now, for this engagement at Fredericktown in October of 1861, there isn't a whole lot to talk about, but I'll share you the most information that I got. So listen up. Engagement at Fredericktown, also known as the Battle of Fredericktown, was a battle of the American Civil War that took place on October 21st, 1861 in Madison County, Missouri. The Union victory consoled control of southeastern Missouri. In October 1861, Missouri State Guard Burgard General M. Jeff Tomlinson led a 15,000 men force into southeastern Missouri. On October 15th, he burned the Iron Mountain Railroad bridge over the Big River in Jefferson County, capturing many of the bridge guards. Two Union columns, one under Colonel Joseph B. Plumber with 1,500 men, and another under Colonel William P. Carlin with 3,000, and was set to pursuit. By October 20th, Thompson had learned of the Union pursuit and withdrawal south of Fredericktown. That evening, however, he decided to attack the Federal advance with his infantrymen. Thompson spent the early morning hours trying to determine the enemy's numbers and disposition. Unable to do so, he placed his troops and artillery in ambush along the road and awaited the Union forces. The bulk of the Missouri State Guard force was hidden from a view on wooden high ground. From that formed a U overlooking the road. Forward of the main body, Colonel Howdy Lower's infantry regiment waited in a cornfield as bait. Close behind was the supporting 12-pounder cannon, as well as a 3 6-pounders farther to the rear and the flank. About noon, Plummer arrived with his column and a dispatch of Colonel William P. Carlos troops. Captain Sherwood's Illinois Cavalry Company made the internal contact. Colonel Ross's 17th Illinois Infantry engaged lower troops first with skirmishes, then the main line of the regiment. A section of Union artillery was brought into service against the Missourians' 12-pounder, which responded. The 20th Illinois and the 11th Missouri applied pressure to both flanks and Lower's forces as more Union artillery joined the battle. Lower, having waited too long to disengage, was killed by a shot to the head, and his regiment retreated, taking heavy casualties. The 1st Indian Cavalry attempted to pursue and to capture the exposed 12-pounder, but were stopped with heavy casualties by the fire of Thompson's forces on both ridges. They called for infantry support, and the 17th Illinois surged forward to claim the now abandoned peace as more Union infantry poured onto the field. Thompson began an orderly withdrawal of the gruesome men, and this more succeeded, except for some rooting cavalry. Thompson's Missouri State Guardsmen suffered a total of 145 casualties during the battle, including 25 dead, 40 wounded, and 80 missing, and 80 captured. There were also lost one artillery piece, an old iron 12-pounder. Union casualties were reported as 7 killed and about 60 wounded. There were a number of other casualties, primarily Union in skirmishes before and after the battle. Some of the Union soldiers believed that locals had assisted Thompson in engagement. They were also angered by perceived mistreatment of Unionist citizens along the line of march. The resentment led to retaliation against the town by the rank and file. At least 7 homes in Fredericktown were burned and other buildings were damaged before the officers regained control of their men.
And this is the Fredericktown Battlefield Museum. But many people think that this museum is closed permanently, but it's not. It's open 2 to 4 p.m. on each Sunday of every month. So, yep, that's what it is. Yeah, those people may be just sick in the head, probably. Anyways, let's just go to Bluff now. Here we are in Bluff, in Virginia. This is where General George B. McClellan is in command, and he suffered a humiliating victory. A humiliating upset here. Why did I say victory? Here, before I explain the whole battle here, here's this tour that American Battlefield Trust did of the 160th anniversary of the battle. So, here you go.
Hey everyone, this is Dan Davis. I'm the Education Manager with the American Battlefield Trust, and I am here on the Balls Bluff Battlefield near Leesburg, Virginia. It's the 160th anniversary. We're going to be talking a lot about the battle today. We're also going to be talking about the events that the Friends Group, one of our major partners with the American Battlefield Trust, is going to be holding later on this week. If you're in the area, you can make it out. Come out here to Balls Bluff this Saturday, October the 23rd. Now, Balls Bluff is what could be considered to be a minor battle. We think of First Manassas beginning the war here in Virginia in July of 1861. And then we skip to the 7 Days Battles, the Peninsula Campaign, the following spring. But sandwiched in between is this sharp fight that takes place in October of 1861, and it has major ramifications, major political consequences for how the United States is going to prosecute the war against the Confederacy going forward. And to talk a little bit about the background and the lead up to this battle, I'm going to bring in our good friend Jim Anderson. He's with the Friends of Balls Bluff. I'm going to turn it over to Jim. Jim, come on up here and give us the background of this engagement.
Okay, Dan, thanks very much. Thanks everybody. We're really glad to have you here. I'm one of the tour guides. We're all volunteers that do tour guiding here on the battlefield. And to give you a little bit of background, first of all, I think the best tour guides are the best historians, and historians are storytellers. And that's what we like to do here, is tell this story. And we like to do it on the battlefield because it's so much more important to connect with what happened here and the people who fought here by being on the actual ground, walking the ground and hearing the stories. And that's what we try to do, the Friends of Balls Bluff. To give you a little bit of background, as Dan was saying, this battle was very small in terms of its size, in terms of casualties and troops engaged. It would have been little more than a skirmish 3 years later in the war. But at this time, it's a very different situation, and that's, I think, primarily for 3 reasons. One is because of the timing. It's very early in the war. It's within a few months of Lincoln actually being sworn in as President of the United States. And it's a time when the atmosphere in Washington is dark, I like to say, very dark, and because they don't know what's going to happen. There's already been one battle, the First Battle of Bull Run or Manassas, also very close to here. If you think back to the end of the Buchanan administration, actually 4 of Buchanan's members of his administration would later go on to serve in the Confederate government or as Confederate officers or both, including the Vice President, John Breckinridge. And so there's still this concern in Washington of how many other Confederate sympathizers are there in the government or in Washington, and what influence can they have. So timing is very important. It's also important for another reason, and that is the inexperience of the troops here. Nobody on the federal side who fought here had combat experience of any significance, and certainly not in the Civil War. These are all green troops. Very much so on the Confederate side, although the Confederate units that fought here had also been at the first battle at Bull Run, which had been exactly 3 months earlier, 21st of July. Now we're on the 21st of October. However, even then, there's relative inexperience in terms of moving troops and understanding how to organize and lead troops in battle, when in a Civil War battle you have all this smoke, all this noise, and all this confusion. All those are going to play roles that we'll hear more about later on. So it's about timing. It's also about location. We're talking about just across the Potomac River and north of Washington, D.C., of course, the Potomac being the international boundary between the United States and the Confederate States for 4 years. So it's right on the doorstep of the nation's capital. There were embedded reporters with the Union, particularly with the 15th Massachusetts. There was a New York Times reporter, Elias Smith, who would be filing reports about this battle that would appear in the paper the very next day, thanks to technology like the printing press and the telegraph. And so because it's a Union defeat, a second major Union defeat, and it's on the outskirts of Washington, it's going to have huge impact. And that's the third reason I think that this battle is important. So it's about timing, it's about location, and it's about impact, primarily political impact, as Dan made allusions to earlier. It's going to result in the formation of the Committee on the Conduct of the War. It's a joint committee formed by Congress only about a month after this battle, and primarily led by what we call radical Republicans at that time. And the purpose of the committee is to investigate what has gone wrong with those defeats early on in the Union Army. The other reason for the formation of the Committee on the Conduct of the War, of course, is the death here on the battlefield of Senator Edward Baker. Baker, the only sitting senator ever to be killed in battle, and it happened here at Ball's Bluff. Baker's death as a senator would have been enough, but it became even more impactful because he's a very close friend of the president, Abraham Lincoln. As a matter of fact, Lincoln named one of his sons Edward Baker Lincoln. So you've got this impact. You've got the mood in Washington. You've got the death of Senator Baker, and you've got yet another Union defeat. It will result in the looking for somebody to blame, if you want to think about it that way. Who is responsible for what happened here? Now, initially, the after-action reports by Charles Stone, who is the commander here on the scene, or at least the theater commander, and General McClellan, the overall commander, his boss, both of them in their after-action reports pointed to Colonel Baker, who was in command on the battlefield in the afternoon. However, he is now a martyr and a close friend of the president. And the members of the Joint Committee of the Conduct of the War are looking for a scapegoat, and they're looking for somebody else. McClellan and Stone realize it's going to be one of them, and it turns out to be Stone. And so the result will be that Stone will testify before the committee 3 times in December and January, December of 1861, January of 1862. And then in February of 1862, he will be secretly arrested at night and taken by train to New York City. He had to pay for his own train ticket, actually. He's imprisoned in Fort Lafayette and held there for 6 months, never charged, before he is eventually released. He does continue in the Army for a while, but his military career is primarily over. This looking for scapegoats through the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War will continue for the entire 4 years of the Civil War, and it will cause any Union general who's going to be in command of an army to think twice about what's going to happen, because he's got to consider the Confederate enemy, but he's also got to consider the possibility, the real potential that he may wind up testifying before this joint committee. So that's some of the background. One other thing I'd like to mention that we try to do here as tour guides and teachers is that we try to help people connect with their history. And one of the ways I like to do that is by showing them this picture. The guy you see here was my grandfather. This picture was taken in 1918 in Montgomery, Alabama, where my grandfather was in training in the United States Army, and he would eventually go to France, where he went over the top in the last offensive, the Argonne Offensive of the First World War. He is talking to a Confederate Civil War veteran. They are standing on the steps of the State House in Montgomery, Alabama, where President Jefferson Davis was sworn in as President of the Confederacy. So I knew my grandfather very well. He had a great influence on me. He was a history teacher himself. And my grandfather told me stories that he heard from a Civil War veteran. So I like to say, how long ago was it really? And we like to hope that that helps our visitors connect with what happened here.
The Battle of Ball's Bluff, also known as the Battle of Leesburg or the Battle of Harrison's Island, was an early battle of the American Civil War fought in Lauderdale County, Virginia on October 21st, 1861, in which Union Army forces under Major General George B. McClellan suffered a humiliating defeat. The operation was planned as a minor reconnaissance across the Potomac to establish whether the Confederates were occupying the strategical important position of Leesburg. A false report of an unguarded Confederate camp encouraged Brigadier General Charles Fulmer Stone to order a raid, which resulted in a clash with enemy forces. And a prominent U.S. Senator in uniform and a dear friend of the Lincoln family, Colonel Edward Baker, tried to reinforce the Union troops but failed to ensure that there were enough boats for the river crossings, which were then delayed. Baker was killed, and a newly arrived Confederate Union routed the rest of the Stone's expedition. The Union losses, although modernized by later standards, alarmed Congress, which set up the Joint Committee on the Conduct of War, a body which would provoke years of bitter political infighting. 3 months after the First Battle of Bull Run, Major General George B. McClellan was building up the Army of the Potomac in preparation for an eventual advance into Virginia. On October 19, 1861, McClellan ordered Brigadier General George A. McCall to march his division to Darrysville, Virginia, 12 miles southeast of Leesburg, in order to discover the purpose of recent Confederate troop movements, which indicated that Colonel Nathan Shanks Evans must have abandoned Leesburg. Evans had, in fact, left the town on October 16th to 17th, but had done so on his own authority when Confederate Brigadier General G.T. Beauregard expressed his displeasure at this move. Evans returned by the evening of October 19th,
He had taken up a defensive position on the Alexander to Winchester Turnpike, modern-day State Route 7, east of town. McClellan came to Drakensville to consult that McCall that same evening and ordered McCall to return to his main camp in Lansing, Virginia. The following morning, however, McCall requested additional time to complete some mapping of the roads in the area and, as a result, did not actually leave landing until the morning of October 21st, just as the fighting at Ball's Bluff, named for a local Ball family, was heating up. On October 20th, while McCall was completing his mapping, McClellan ordered Brigadier General Charles Stone to conduct what he had called a slight demonstration in order to see how the Confederates might react. Stone moved his troops to the river at Edwards Ferry, positioned other forces along the river. He had his artillery fire into suspected Confederate positions and briefly crossed about 100 men on the first Minnesota to the Virginia shore just before dusk. Having gotten no reaction from colonial weapons with all this activity, Stone recalled his troops to their camps, and the slight demonstration came to an end. This was the genesis of the Battle of Ball's Bluff. Contrary to the long-held traditional aspect, it did not come from a plan either by McClellan or Stone to take Leesburg. The initial crossings of the troops was a small reconsistency that was followed by what was intended to be a raiding party. To make matters worse, Stone was not advised that McClellan and his division had been ordered back to Washington.
On the morning of October 21st, Colonial Denver's raiding party discovered the mistake made the previous evening by the patrol. There was no camp to raid. Opting not to recross the river immediately, Denvers deployed his men in a tree line and sent a messenger back to report to Stone and to get new instructions. On hearing the messenger's report, Stone sent him back to tell Denvers that the remainder of the 15th Massachusetts, another 350 men, would cross the river and move to his position. When they arrived, Denvers was turned to his raiding party back into reconnaissance and moved toward Leesburg. While the messenger was going back to Colonial Denvers with this new information, Colonial and U.S. Senator Edward Dickinson Baker showed up at Stone's camp to find out about the morning's events. He had not been involved in any of the activities to that point. Stone told him of the mistake about the camp and about his new orders to reinforce Denver's to reconnaissance purposes. He then instructed Baker to go to the crossing point, evaluating the situation, and either withdraw the troops already in Virginia or cross additional troops at his discretion. On the way up the river to execute this order, Baker met Denver's messenger, coming back a second time to report that Denvers and his men had encountered briefly engaged the enemy. One company, Colonial K of the 17th Mississippi Infantry. Baker immediately ordered as many troops as he could find to cross the river, but he didn't so without determining what boats were available to do this. A bottleneck quickly developed so that the Union troops could cross slowly in small numbers, making the crossing last throughout the day. Meanwhile, Denver's men, now about 650 strong, remained in its advanced position and engaged 2 additional skirmishes with a growing force of Confederates, while other Union troops crossed the river but deployed near the bluff and did not advance from there. Denver's finally withdrew about 2 p.m. and met Baker, who had finally crossed the river half an hour later, beginning around 3 p.m. The fighting began in earnest and was almost continuous until just after dark. Colonial Baker was killed at about 4:30 p.m. and remains the only United States senator ever killed in a battle. Following an endorsement attempt to break out of the constructive position around the bluff, the Federals began to recross the river in some disarray. Shortly before dark, a fresh Confederate regiment, the 17th Mississippi, arrived and formed the core of the climb. The assault that finally broke the Union troops. Many of the Union soldiers were driven down the steep slope at the southern end of the Ball's Bluff, behind the current location of the National Cemetery, and into the river. Boats attempted to cross the back to the Harrison Island were soon swamped and capsized. Many Federals, including some of the wounded, were drowned. Bodies floated downriver to Washington and even as far as Mount Vernon. In the days following the battle, a total of 235 Federals were killed and 226 were wounded, and 553 were captured on the banks of the Potomac later that night. The official records incorrectly state that only 49 Federals were killed in this battle, an error probably resulting from a mistaken reading of the report of the Union brutal detail, which crossed over the next day under the flag of truce. 54 Union dead, of whom only one is identified, are buried in Ball's Bluff Battlefield National Cemetery. A Union howitzer captured by Confederate forces was recaptured May 29th, 1863 from John S. Morsey raid at Greenwich, Virginia.
Now, Sonic and Meg, you know what happened. I am a professional at history. I know a whole lot about it. Indeed you do, Parker. Yes, indeed you do. Now let's just chill for a moment. Yeah, how about your girlfriend, Twilight Sparkle, can make out with you? Okay.
Come and kiss me, Parker.
Okay, Sonic and Meg. Come here, Twilight. Well, that's all done with. Yeah, so, bye guys.